Welcome back, everyone. In the last video, we learned about the differences in reducers inside of Redux versus context. We also learned about how to create our root reducer. In this video now, we're going to take this root reducer and we are going to bring it into our store.js. So first, what we're going to do is just import root reducer from our root reducer file. And now what we want to do is we want to finish building out this store object. So in order to do this, what we need to do is we need to understand what fundamentally creates a store. So I want to say export const store is equal to calling this create store method. So when we create a store, this store takes 3 arguments. The first one is really actually the only one that is necessary, and that is the root reducer. So it's really simple. You need a root reducer in order to generate the store. It's that simple. All of these reducers, as we know, are pure functions. They're functions that receive a state and an action, and in turn, they return you back some object that represents the values in the state. This store is just in order to facilitate the movement and passing of actions through these reducers. So all a store really needs is just the root reducer in order to be created. But in order for this to be useful, we also want to pass it this logger. And this logger is essentially something that allows us to see what the state looks like before an action is dispatched, what the action is, and then how the state in turn looks after the action. So it's very good in order to help us see that. In order to do that, we actually need to create this thing called middlewares. Middlewares are kind of like little library helpers that run before an action hits the reducer. So whenever you dispatch an action, before that action hits the reducers, it hits the middleware first. So here, what's going to happen is our middlewares is just going to be including our logger. The only thing, though, is that in order for our middlewares to be passed into create store, we actually have to pass it as the third argument. The second argument is if you want to add any additional default states here. This is added so that we can actually make it easier to test, but we'll talk about that much later. For now, I just want you to pass undefined because it's an optional second parameter. The only other thing as well is that in order for these middlewares to actually work, we have to call apply middleware. So what we can do here is we can say, hey, these middlewares are actually something like enhancers. So in order for this to work, you have to generate it using compose. So I want to say composed enhancers is equal to calling compose with apply middleware and then passing middlewares in. Spreading it actually as the argument. So what this will do is it'll pass every single middleware that we have if we had more. You can imagine if we had middleware 2 or middleware 3, like all these different potential middlewares that are helpful for us, which we'll learn later on. This will allow us to spread it into this apply middleware argument as subsequent arguments. Compose is a functional programming concept. It's essentially a way for us to pass multiple functions left to right. We don't really need it in a lot of the code we write, but as far as this composition pattern is concerned for Redux, this is something that we need to have. We'll discuss this more again later in the course. Right now, I just want to focus on creating the store. So right now, these are just the steps that we have to go through in order to actually create what the store wants for us. So we're going to take these compose enhancers and pass them as this third argument because there's different types of enhancers we can have. Middleware is just the primary one. So here, essentially what we're doing is we're passing them through as this composed enhancers third argument. It enhances our store. The middlewares enhance our store. They catch actions before they hit our reducers and they log out the state. That's an enhancement, which is why we have this step. So now that we've generated this store, what we need to do is we need to add this into our application. In order to do that, if you think about it, we know that Redux is available throughout the entire application. This means that chances are there is some type of provider that actually wraps the application, because that's the only way we know that we can have this kind of access throughout the application. We learned this with context. We create our own provider and we wrap the application. Anyone that's a child inside has access. And it turns out that Redux has always been using Context API under the hood, even before Context API was popularized. So Redux has always been using providers in order to give us this functionality. So it's very similar. We import in a provider from React, Redux, which is their own provider instance, very similar to the one that we created. And we want to wrap the application inside of this provider. Once we've wrapped this provider, the next thing that we need to do is we need to pass in the store. So this provider is expecting a store argument, which will be the store that we created. So we want to import in store from our store folder and then our store file. And the store object is just what we're going to pass in. So going back to our store.js, this object is what we're passing to our provider. And now, technically speaking, we have our reducer set up. The only thing is that we actually have not hooked anything up to this reducer. So how do we do that? Well, this of course is where we need to actually figure out how to, 1, dispatch actions, and then 2, get the values out of our store into our application. And this involves the steps of using actions and dispatch. So we'll talk about that in the next video. In this video, there was just a lot of configuration and setup, a lot of which is not necessarily super sensical because we're just learning all this setup for now. But if you follow along and once we get to the actual full flow, all of these pieces will start to make more sense. So in the next video, let's discuss actually interacting with the store now that we have this set up. I'll see you in the next video.